Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event, CWA Annual Spring Brunch and Lifetime Achievement Awards Ceremony. I'm just going to give you a run through of the technical aspects of this event. You were just in the networking portion of the event. For the networking portion, obviously you can talk to other people at your tables. You can move to other tables by double-clicking on empty seats. Also within the room, we have a number of sponsors for this event. You can click on their banners, visit their websites, and even watch some videos that they have provided for us. At this time, I want to invite up the CWA Vice President, Elizabeth Schneider. Let me just invite her up here. Elizabeth?
Hello.
All right, there we go. I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for CWA's 5th Annual Spring Brunch, celebrating the CWAF Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm Elizabeth Schneider, the Vice President of Chicago Women in Architecture. CWA is a not-for-profit, volunteer-led membership organization that works to provide a forum for women in architecture and related professions and aims to support women at all stages of their career. The CWA was founded in 1974 when Gertrude Lemp-Kurbis sent an invitation to come meet other female architects about coalition to the women in the Chicago architecture community. Her call was answered by 7 women: Carol Ross Barney, Cynthia Weiss, Gundiz Dagdalin, Natalie Dubois, Laura Fisher, Jane Jacobson, and today's honoree, Nancy Epshire. When these 8 women first met 47 years ago, they were seeking to combat the isolation felt by women architects at the time by creating a community that they could turn to for support. While much progress has been made, there is still work to be done. It has been my pleasure to join CWA in carrying on the legacy of our founders and continue the work of creating a more equitable profession. The work that we do at CWA is greatly helped by the support of our sponsors. I would especially like to thank today's sponsors for making this event possible. Our gratitude goes to our partner sponsors, SOM and Ross Barney Architects, whom you'll hear more from later in the event. Our thanks also goes to our advocate sponsors, Brindstone Lynch, the Graham Foundation, and Urban Works, and our supporting sponsors, Aparna Bapu Consulting, Getch Partners, HED, Catherine Quinn Architects, Kuklinski and Rapp Architects, and Troy Architects. You can learn more about these sponsors by clicking on their logos at the sides of this event screen. We are also grateful for additional sponsorship by Aris Tech Surfaces, Cordig & Clark, H.J. Kessler Associates, and Laura Fisher, FAIA. Finally, I would also like to acknowledge the dedication of our platform host, Brian Malone of Malone Media, and thank him in advance for his continued support throughout the event today. And now, I would like to hand things over to Alexandra Lee Small, CWAF Consulting Executive Director, and Patricia Saldana Natke, CWAF Board Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for the introduction. We are so pleased to have all of you in attendance for the celebration supporting Chicago women in architecture. I am Alexandra Lee Small, Consulting Executive Director for CWAF, and along with the CWAF Board Chair, Pat Saldana Natke, we thank you for your support today as we honor Nancy A. Abshire for her prioritization of mentorship and training for the next generation of architects. It really has been a pleasure to get to know Nancy following her nomination, and I know that we are all in for a very special presentation today. Echoing Elizabeth, in addition to our gratitude for your presence and our event sponsors and our event host for making this event possible, I also want to offer sincere thanks to Elizabeth for her leadership throughout the event, to the women-owned restaurants and bakeries across Chicago that partnered with CWA to help honor the event's brunch tradition, so cheers. To Olivia Gia of the Chicago Communications for the SOM office, also the CWA Marketing Chair, and to Karen Weedy, the Manager of Library Records and Information Services at SOM, for their collaboration and work culling the SOM archives and sharing the news of the award. Thanks also go to Iker Gill, Executive Director of the SOM Foundation, for his support and thoughtful words to honor Nancy, and the entire CWA Executive Committee for their collaboration. Brian, if you could please, oh, good, we're on the slideshow, wonderful. So CWAF, the Chicago Women in Architecture Foundation, was established in 2003 as a 501c3 nonprofit foundation, born of a desire to formalize a scholarship program. CWAF support now also extends to fundraising for events and special projects that further careers for women in and around the field of architecture. Signature CWAF initiatives include the Gertrude Lemp-Kurbis Scholarship and the Lifetime Achievement Award, with a few other key projects, including the Rula Scholarship and CWAF Forward, both rolling out this fall, with other projects in development. This morning, we celebrate the CWAF Lifetime Achievement Awardee. This award was first established in 2017 to honor distinguished women who have positively contributed as a member of CWA and have supported issues faced by women architects throughout their career. Recipients of the annual award are nominated and selected by and CWAF officers as recognition of the awardee's impact on the lives and careers of others in the architecture community and inspiring a new generation of women to engage with CWA in the field of architecture at large. I imagine all of you celebrating with us today agree that Nancy is an exemplary figure to honor with this award. None of the work of the CWAF would be possible without the commitment and dedication of the Foundation's Board of Directors. And as such, I'm really delighted to turn this over to Pat, our board chair. And Brian, if you would advance to the next slide, please.
Thank you, Alexandra. So I'm Pat Saldana-Natke, the board chair. As the board chair for the last 11 months, it's undoubtedly been a challenging world with an unprecedented amount of speed bumps. The pandemic continued beyond the timeline of all of our expectations, yet we emerged much more attuned to the attributes of strong leadership, represented by honesty, transparency, character, and integrity. Our profession has been unearthed, and collectively we stand firm on our organizational values. Quite a bit has been written about the ethics of recovery, and as Brené Brown writes about courage, in times of normalcy, you focus on what you do, but in times of crisis, you reveal who you are. So Chicago Women in Architecture, CWA, our originating organization, is the first organization of women architects in the US. We're the leaders. Our CWAF Foundation, which was established in 2003, was formed to assure that women are influential leaders in the built environment by providing funding for scholarships and signature events, such as this one, the Lifetime Achievement Event. The Gertrude Lemp-Kurbis Scholarship is another, the Rula Scholarship, the ARE licensure support, and our newest, the Ladders to Leadership Fellowship program that you'll hear about in a few minutes. Although it's been a challenging year, I look back and I'm so incredibly proud of our accomplishments. The first is about partnership. We focused on creating a strong bond, a connective tissue with CWA. It required a big pivot for us to hold the first virtual Lifetime Achievement Award last year, but over 100 women attended and it was expertly curated. Most importantly, it was an inspiring event and it showed how Dr. Catherine Anthony's lifelong advocacy for equity in the profession and her work impacted so many positively. The other was visibility. We focused on visibility for our scholarships. Rula's scholarship came at a critical time to determine and help those that are heading to graduate school. It was added on in addition to the Gertrude Kurbis Scholarship. Last year's awardee, Dr. Catherine Anthony, who is here with us today, I saw her in the audience. She proudly even mentioned and partially credits the CWAF Lifetime Achievement Award as a key factor in her later receiving the big national AIA, ASCA Topaz Medal for architectural education. We want to continue to raise awareness and recognition of our long pipeline of successful women and trailblazers, from career visionaries to exemplary scholarship winners. For example, just recently, Carol Ross Barney being at the top 3 finalists for the AIA National Gold Medal. The women have achieved so much. We've also worked on our organizational management. We created committees to develop a true committee with everyone's voices being equally valued. We now have committees, the Development Committee, which is brilliantly led by Grace Rapp. We have an Awards Committee, creatively run by Susan King. We have the Finance Committee, expertly run by Helen Kessler. And we have many other new committees, an HR Committee run by Roberta Feldman, Nominating Committee run by Beth Scanlon, and the Rula Scholarship Committee run by Rula Alikatu. Their genuine passion for the profession, their generous time, their incredible talent is invaluable to CWAF's success. And I thank Alexandra, our Consulting Executive Director, and these committee chairs for their commitment. We continue our advocacy. It was a productive, impactful year. We leaned in and we gave generously of extra support, time, and positive energy to shape our 2021 CWAF Forward campaign. At the holiday party, we did a soft launch of this CWAF Forward campaign, a fundraising initiative that's going to span across a few years. But I won't steal the thunder from the Development Committee that's going to explain a little bit more in a few minutes. Although we're still in true recovery period, I'm confident that 2021, 2022 will be a bolder, brighter year, and our CWAF Forward campaign will be very impactful. It's the right time right now to embark on a leadership training focus to ensure that we don't lose ground, but instead we strengthen the safety net for women in our profession. We need women with strong ethics, values, and leadership skills to be at all decision-making levels, but especially at the top. We continue our support as we pave the path for the future. So thank you. Carol Ross Barney, our board vice chair, will announce our 2021 awardee.
Good morning. I'm so glad that you're all here on our and our architects. It's really an honor and a privilege to, as Ross Barney Architects, sponsor this event. And we've been asked to present just a little intro to our practice and our firm. Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be able to sponsor this with the other sponsors. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Brian, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the presentation. Thank you. So on behalf of CWAF and the Development Committee, it's my pleasure to introduce the Ladders to Leadership program. It's a unique program that we've been developing with professional coaches to focus on women architects in Chicago, enable them to be leaders and presidents and CEOs of their organizations. Next slide, please. So anyone who's been in the profession for a while is very familiar with these numbers. We've seen equal numbers of women and men graduating from college and accredited programs, but as they progress in their careers, the numbers go down. And we've identified pinch points as we've been talking about this over the last 10 years, and even more so now with the coronavirus, we've seen record numbers of professional women leave their careers for childcare. So now more than ever, it's important that we start to focus on leadership programs for women, not only within our profession, but just to try to advance women coming up behind us. Next slide, please. So what we've been working on with professional coaches is trying to develop a curriculum, as you can see here, focusing on different skills that are necessary to lead a company or lead a firm. So when we start to invite women into this program, these are the practice areas that we'll be focusing on to try to hone the skills for women to move up in their careers. Next slide, please. This program will begin in October of this year, gathering twice a month in various venues around Chicago. You'll be introduced to some of the women who helped create this program, some of the leaders that currently are designing all the spaces you see around you, and also developing your network. At the conclusion of this program, you'll have your own pathway to principal action plan that you've developed to help you move forward to be in a leadership role. Next slide, please. So beginning in August, we'll start accepting nominations and applications for this program. Ideally, this will be for women who are in mid-management phase of their career, looking for that next step to try to move forward and become a leader within the firm. So someone around 10 to 15 years of experience is where we'll be targeting. Next slide, please. So this is an important program, not only for women looking to move up, but women who are coming out of school as well. This is our efforts to try to do a top-down leadership approach to raise the numbers and increase the diversity of the leadership of the firms in Chicago. So we anticipate this being something that will help move the women architects in Chicago forward and hopefully be a catalyst for other programs throughout the country. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I assume my mic is on. Yes. Okay, cool. I am Susan King. I'm the awards committee chair this year, a very new committee, and I am super excited and honored to be presenting an inaugural award this morning. And it's called the Service Award, and it's brand new and probably overdue, but it also marks the beginning of an expansion of our awards program. And while that is all that I can say about that right now, do keep your ears and eyes open for more on that later this year as well. So I am also honored to be presenting it this year to two women. It's a dual award this year, and the two women are Pamela J. Hutter and Elizabeth Scanlon, who have both always been one step ahead of me in both CWA and now CWAF. As I'm a newer CWAF board member, I am so thankful for the groundwork that they have laid, and it reminds me of my early years as a CWA member in the 1990s and the path that they were laying for me then to do the work that for the group that I went on to do. And so specifically, let me tell you about these incredible women, and keep in mind today that I am focusing on their service to Chicago women architects, but they both also have fascinating careers that are distinct from each other and also worthy of recognition in their own right. So after you hear what I'm about to say, I think you will agree that it's really appropriate to be awarding this to them together, because the work that they have done for CWA, for both organizations over the years, has been really extremely collaborative. So first, a little bit about Pamela J. Hutter. So she first joined CWA in 1983 and then served as the CWA Vice President and Programming Chair from 1989 to 1990. And then, similar to today, went on to be CWA President in 1990 and 91. And then she renewed her activity. She was a member all of those years, but became very active again in 1998, serving as treasurer through 2003. And so being treasurer apparently wasn't enough. During that time, she, along with Beth Scanlon, established the Chicago Women in Architecture Foundation. So a decade later, in a CWA board meeting on May 10th, 2011, Pam moved with Beth Scanlon's support to reconstitute the CWA Foundation Board with officers that were distinct from the CWA board and their officers. And this was in order to restart a new era of the foundation and funding and the things we could fund. So while serving as CWA president in 1991, Pam also co-founded Sonic Hutter Lee Limited, where she was president, project manager, and designer until leaving there to start her current firm, Hutter Architects, in 1998. And then a little bit about Elizabeth Scanlon. She's a registered architect and a lead accredited professional, and she first became involved in CWA in 1984. And served as vice president and programming chair during Pam's presidency and became president following Pam in 1992 to 93. Beth has served multiple leadership roles over the years, but most recently, she chaired the CWAF Foundation from 2011 until 2020. So Beth has had a long, and so in addition to all of that, a long and successful career in the public realm, working for the city of Chicago under 3 different mayors. She first worked in the Department of Planning and Development, then in the Department of Buildings under its different names over the years, and now she is Deputy Managing Architect with the Public Building Commission. So without further ado, I would like to turn the virtual stage over. I think Beth is going to accept the award first.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you very much. I am very honored by this. I just want to say that I have been absolutely amazed by how much has been accomplished by the foundation within the last 10 years. The amount of progress with the organization and the ability to move things forward has been pretty amazing. The current leadership, I am awed by the people who are the board of the foundation now. There is so much that is in the works and moving forward. It's pretty exciting. And so thank you very much. And I'm looking forward and excited to see what kind of impact the foundation and CWA are going to have in the future. Thank you.
I think we have Pam coming on, right?
Thank you so much, Susan. This is pretty amazing, and thank you for the little it's hard to see in the sun, the little paperweight. Thank you from the organization. I've long believed that leadership is what truly happens when the leader leaves the room, and the whole idea of starting something and then watching where it goes. That's the true beauty, and I couldn't be prouder as Beth said, with current leadership in CWAF and where this is going. I am just so excited and so ready. I want to throw myself into my career, make lots of money, and then be able to give back bigly to I say that the word bigly facetiously, to CWAF, because we're just going to blow the socks off of this. And there's the right leadership set to do that. So with that, thank you for the little crystal paperweight. And it has truly been an honor, and thank you very much. Namaste.
Thanks, you guys. I think that Olivia is coming on next. Thanks, everyone. See you in the network room afterwards.
I guess I'm coming in, but good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of today's ceremony honoring Nancy Abshire. My name is Iker Hill, and 2 years ago, I joined the SOM Foundation as its executive director. Nancy had that role for the previous 10 years, or a quarter of the existence of the foundation. While I knew of Nancy from my time at SOM 15 years ago, it was great to discover her contributions to the foundation in my new role. Sometimes, with all the work that goes on in an organization, it is hard to understand or appreciate the real contributions that people make. Nancy's mentorship and support to the emerging students and practitioners, recipients of the several awards of the foundation, made it evident. She connected new winners with former fellows to learn from their experience, contacted people in other cities and offices to expand the network of fellows, and help them navigate the process to produce the final reports and present their findings. She also made sure that winners, such as the recipients of the Chinese Fellowship traveling to the US, had the opportunity to present their work in the SOM offices, celebrating their accomplishments with those already practicing. Reading the acknowledgement sections of the final reports of the last decade, as well as the thick binders that Nancy has kept for each student with every single email printed, are demonstrations of Nancy's commitment, generosity, and patience. While I won't be printing every email that I receive from the fellows, I'm thankful that her work has given a solid ground for the SOM Foundation to continue to evolve. I'm extremely happy that today Nancy is being recognized for her contributions as an architect for over 5 decades, for her leadership across different initiatives and organizations, and for being a mentor to a new generation of students. Congratulations, Nancy, and thank you to the Chicago Women in Architecture Foundation and Chicago Women in Architecture for making sure that Nancy's ongoing contributions are visible and continue to inspire future generations. Thank you.
Let's see. Carol should be up next, right?
Yes, I believe Carol should be up to introduce me.
Okay, I'm up. I do remember the exact moment I met Nancy. It was 47 years ago. It was 1974, and I was a true Chicago architectural scene newbie. I had just returned from Peace Corps service, and I knew absolutely no women architects. But I did get the postcard that was previously, actually, I didn't get it. It came to Halliburton Route where I was working, inviting women architects in Chicago to Gertrude Kurbis's office. So I went. At the scene, Gert's office wasn't that big. It was really just a single room above Michigan Avenue. We all had to sit on the floor. And women trickled in, and I was waiting for the meeting to start when the SOM contingent arrived. Nancy and Natalie DeBlois. Everything got really intense from that point on. For example, Nancy and I worked together on the inaugural CWA show, Contemporary Directions, which we literally built by hand. I've learned from experience that she may be quiet, but when she says to do something, it's important and you better go do it. And I watched her as she built a stellar career. Nancy came to Chicago from Dayton, Ohio to study interior design at Northwestern and was seduced by Chicago architecture. She never left. After receiving her Bachelor of Architecture from UIC, she joined Skidmore, Owings & Merrill in 1968. In her 51-year career at Skidmore, she wore many hats: design architect, senior architect, sometimes exhibit design coordinator, construction coordinator, and most of her career working as a senior project manager. Working in Chicago and the UK, where she helped establish the London office, her portfolio includes an absolutely amazing array of distinguished projects. Beyond her projects, though, and this is where I really grew to know Nancy, she provided leadership and resources for generations of young architects, accumulating with her service for more than 10 years as executive director of the SOM Foundation, which Iker has just outlined for you. There's no way that I can do justice to her accomplishments in this introduction. Nancy is a true pioneer who's been there for women architects in Chicago essentially forever. In 2017, the Chicago Women in Architecture Foundation created the CWA Lifetime Achievement Award. As Alexandra mentioned, described beautifully, the idea was to honor distinguished women, architects, and those who contributed to solving and supporting women and the issues they support, the issues that they confront in their careers. Previous winners have been celebrated Chicago architects: Cindy Weiss, FAIA, Ruo Alakioto, FAIA, and Linda Searle, FAIA. Last year's recipient was UIUC professor and the 2021 Topaz laureate, Catherine Anthony. So I'm not sure I need to say more. I know Nancy's going to present her work. And so it's with great pleasure and immense personal honor that I introduce this year's CWA Lifetime Achievement Award winner, the 5th distinguished winner, one of our founders, and my longtime friend, Nancy Abshire.
Thank you, Carol. And before I hand it over to Nancy, I would like to present her with the award here. I'm going to go ahead and open that up.
It's like Christmas.
Yeah.
Oh my.
So it's a necklace.
Oh my. It's very unusual and beautiful. Oh, dear Lord.
There you go.
Thank you very much. I'm speechless and honored to receive this award. And in preparing some presentation, it was very interesting because I had a chance to really go through photographs of all my projects and not to spend too long to have maybe the things that were most meaningful and a learning experience in every particular way, as all projects are. And I was fortunate to receive assignments to a diverse collection of projects that I fortunately was able to stay on from beginning projects for the whole project. So I started to see projects from beginning to end at an early time and spent time on different sorts of projects. So I've pulled out the things that are sort of my highlight favorites projects. When I first graduated from Northwestern, because I had an interiors degree at that time, Northwestern's interiors was focused a lot on the work of well-known architects as part of our architectural history. So we were taken on a chartered bus around the Midwest looking at Frank Lloyd Wright work and all the notable early architects as a foundation. So when I started working at Murphy, who was my first employer, I did interiors for commercial projects that were fairly large scale in all instances. And I'll not spend time talking about those other than to say that first one I was working on was O'Hare Airport, which was Murphy's commission at that time to do all the buildings at O'Hare, because that was a orchard out there and not land developed at that time. So I was able to work on the interiors of what was then the restaurant building, the circular building still there connecting two lengths of terminal. And it had been designed by Gertrude Kurbitz, who worked at SOM at one time. So I went through that project, and then the University of Illinois project came about to build the Circle campus, and I did the interiors on the Student Union building there. And in the process at Murphy, I came to realize there were some women in architecture, and that intrigued me. So I continued to work on the U of I work and learned more about the faculty that were going to be there, and ended up being in the first class of architect students going through the program at U of I Chicago. But the first classes were upper class people who had started at Navy Pier back after World War II, and they all had, by that time, gone as far as Navy Pier had offered, and you had to go to Champaign. And most of them were married and had children. They couldn't go to Champaign. So they all turned out when the upper class program for a 5-year degree came about. There was about 50 people in Chicago. And amongst those were 3 women who had similar tracks to my own, in that we never heard that much about architecture in our high school visits with the representatives of schools. But the exception for me was that Northwestern came to my high school in Ohio and presented that they indeed had an architectural interior program, which was non-existent to my knowledge of anywhere else around. So I ended up at Northwestern. And so to pick up on that, I was able to work at Murphy 30 hours a week and hop on the Blue Line and ride out to campus when it was done, and take my courses, of which I had 2.5 years credit from Northwestern applicable, so I could work 30 hours. At that time, I changed over to Skidmore, and they allowed that I could work 30 hours a week and go to classes at lunch hour and 2 afternoons a week. So I managed to get through my architecture degree working at Skidmore. My first project at Skidmore, I can't believe I was assigned to it, but it was a project in England. And I had been an Anglophile for a long time, and I love history of European culture and architecture. And so I was assigned to be on this project in England. But more to the point, Bruce Graham sent me to England to work in the office of our associate architect there. And I would visit in Bristol to meet with the company to confirm the program for all the spaces, because this was a very large company in England who had been in existence in the early 1800s. And they were very active in products of tobacco, which of course today is not a popular subject. And they had connections with tobacco from Virginia and Ohio in America. And so we developed from a headquarters they had in downtown Bristol to a new piece of land they had bought out in the countryside with rolling hills. And we developed both a new manufacturing facility that was up to date, plus a headquarters building, and connected all these with links across the valleys. That was the site. And that was my first project at SOM. And I was absolutely thrilled. And I stayed on it for 5 years, coming and going. And when that first project was over, I was assigned to First Wisconsin National Bank project, which was the second one on the slides now, if you can move that forward, is page 6 in the slides. And this was occurring about the time that there were all these student riots in front of the conventions for the 1968 presidential primaries, or the convention of the parties. And that was held at a hotel just down the street on Michigan Avenue. And students started protesting out on the park land in front of the hotel and creating quite a stir. And as a result, these protests spread to campuses around the country. And it was kind of a period of turmoil, really. And we were asked by the First Wisconsin National Bank to do a building for them in Madison, Wisconsin, that would be for students. And the concept that Mr. Graham saw was that we should not build a building that was like a fortress, as some buildings had started to happen, but we should show that we weren't afraid of them, and that we would have a very open and attractive building, and it faced the center of the square where the Capitol was located. So the pictures that are in view here are both the finished product, all glass, and interiors that are open with big trees and primary colors. And it was very successful, and we never had any problem with the students bombing the building or breaking glass or anything like that. And we kind of put the message out there that we weren't afraid and that we wanted to have a relationship with the students. The next project to go through is the one that is called Chicago Tribune Company. And it is located over at the island in the middle of the North Branch of the Chicago River. And we had to undergo extensive study of how newspapers were made in the old days, which were still the way they were doing it in the Tribune Tower, where there were 5 floors of manufacturing of the newspaper that were all below grade. So it was amazing. We toured there, we saw how it was done, and that they knew that it was going to move into the electronical process. And there were a few examples of that at the Los Angeles Times and the San Diego Times that already had started doing their newspaper preparation for printing electronically, and their print locations could be off-site a distance away, which was the case the Los Angeles Times had its office downtown, but they printed at Orange County, some distance away. So we made a tour of Los Angeles Times and San Diego Times to see the new way that the Chicago Tribune wanted to change over to, and that resulted in offices still remaining at the first part at Tribune Tower, but all the printing took place on the island remotely, but not that far away. The pictures that are shown of the brick building there is where they were made, and the offices were in the tower, and those pictures are shown as well. After that, which was about 1978, the work in the Middle East started to get very interesting because there were the building of the Jeddah airport for the Hajj, for people who traveled from all over the world to visit Mecca in their lifetime. And they were bringing in something like 8 million people in a 3-week period. So they built a special airport. Concurrently, and you've probably all seen pictures of that big tent structure that's become famous, that Jeddah itself was interested in also building hotels and other accommodations that they never had because tourists really never went there. And so we had a commission to do a hotel in Jeddah that became known as the Red Sea Palace. And it was a combination of partnership with a Swiss hotel operator and some contact from a manager in Jeddah who knew of a prefabricated system that was built in Mobile, Alabama, that we could build quickly hotel rooms fully furnished and shipped from Mobile to Jeddah. So I worked on concepts of how to stack all of these rooms after we visited their factory down in Mobile and understood their technology. So then we had to work within that to create a way to incorporate their prefabricated room boxes onto a base that was built there. And the next group of slides, the Red Sea Palace Hotel, first is a rendering of it, and then the next views were in construction, and we built terraces and stepped part of the hotel. So one of the models I built represented a close-up view of how the terraces would face the sea and create some outdoor spaces as well for the premium rooms there. After the Red Sea Palace, which was interesting in that the client within the Red Sea group was so-called Queen Ifat of Saudi Arabia. And she was the wife of King Faisal, who was assassinated. And she was a very proactive woman about getting schools built in Saudi for women that lived there. And that had not been the case. Women were not highly educated in that time. And she and her children, 2 of whom worked with her on the project, although I never met with them because I couldn't go to Saudi. Being a female, they hadn't believed to travel for outside women. But her 2 sons, of which she had 7 children, worked with her, Prince Bandar and Prince Turki. And I subsequently recognized those names later on in my career, where Prince Bandar, one of them was the Saudi military leader, and the other had become an ambassador from Saudi to the United States. So I recognized the Bandar and Turkey of those days as having grown into roles prominent in the country. When that was finished and we started to work, or at least I did, back in the US, we did Quaker Tower that's on the river here between Clark and Dearborn. And it was unique at that time because it was a Miesian style building at a point where there was very high interest in doing the postmodern thing. And so there were a lot of concrete buildings going up, and we put in a glass and steel building, which kind of got dismissed by the local scene because it hadn't picked up on the postmodern. But what we did do is, because it was right on the water and they had a basement that looked out, we encouraged them to create a restaurant, and it's viewable at the left in the picture. We built an exterior elevator tower and stairs so that people could come from the outside and come down to the restaurant. So it was kind of a beginning of extending some of the walkways that existed partially along the river, but were not all fully connected. But we connected with a hotel right next to us in the same block, done by a St. Louis architect firm, and collaborated with them to build it across the block there, that there would be a walk area. Going to my next era was back to Europe, and there had been a piece of land that was available for development down the river across from Greenwich, England. And one of our partners actually in New York had a connection with people to do work in England. And so 2 projects, the Broadgate development, which was an air rights project, which is also unheard of in England at that time, over Liverpool train station, and the project at Canary Wharf, which was a development of derelict land that Margaret Thatcher had declared that if people would take derelict land and develop it, they would get tax breaks for 10 years on their development. So those 2 projects, the first of which are the Broadgate views, and the final building, which is the arched building that stretches all the way across about a dozen tracks emanating from Liverpool train station north. And what was interesting is that train stations in London, and there are about 8 or 10 of them, they are circular on a route that is connected by the elevated and the subway to each train station. And they are like spokes of a wheel that they fan out to all directions in England, so that trains in the Victorian era and earlier would not pass through London Central and smoke up the air. And they also, to this day, are still located in those conditions. And they are connected by this L and subway circling the city and leaving the city center free of transport that is on ground or anything. And so that connected all the buildings from Liverpool to other train stations if they were transferring to go somewhere else in England. And I worked on that and the Canary Wharf projects concurrently, because both of those became projects for which we were able to open an office in London. And I was sent there early on in '87 when we opened the office with about a dozen people from Chicago going over to be the first people there to start the office and then develop it. We had two teams, both a Canary Wharf team and a Broadgate team in the primary sense. And those projects both were about the same length in 5 years, from '87 to '92. And during that time, I also worked on a project that was a business park in the suburbs near Heathrow Airport. And it was on derelict land that actually was contaminated. And they had a huge team of people who had worked on how to decontaminate land. And these were people from mainly from Europe. And they were on the team along with a co-architect from London. And those projects at Stockley Park were numerous, with different architects in each of the projects in the master plan. And we had a group of 3 buildings, and each of these buildings was ultimately leased or purchased then after they were finished from the collection, which was probably 20 or 30 buildings on this land out there. And our 3 were taken by a pharmaceutical company in the UK that was quite prominent. And so we worked on that and helped with some of the interior planning that was represented in the picture that you're seeing now. And they were 3 little buildings that were grouped together, and the entrance to the site for those 3 buildings was a little circular drive. And an artist who heard about it came to show me his work, and he wanted to do something for the project. And he had a concept already that is shown in the right hand or the left hand view. It's quite tall, and it sits in front of the center building, and is sort of a grand entrance to the complex of those 3 buildings. Then, when we were finished with that in '92, the buildings in downtown London and in Canary Wharf and Liverpool Station and all had gone up so fast that they started to have overbuilt. And so things slowed down after that. And so some of us came back to Chicago in '92, and everything was slow at that point because the overbuilt conditions that had occurred, not just in England, but in the United States as well, diminished the number of projects we had. And so the first projects that I worked on, which were in the downtown area, was for Arthur Andersen. They had their world headquarters in Chicago, and they took rental in 2 buildings that are on Michigan Avenue, just below the bridge. They are very Miesian, and they had atriums, and the 2 buildings were connected, and Arthur Andersen took a fair amount of space in those 2 buildings to put their world headquarters into. So I worked on that, which included space planning and interiors, as well as looking at the architectural implications of developing the space. That was finished in about 1996. And then one of the things that came about that I found to be a very interesting subject matter was that we had started to make submissions for performing arts centers, which seemed to be something that universities were doing a lot of at that moment. Business buildings were less prominent. A lot of performing arts and the like. So we tried out for a number of them, and we're lucky to get one in Dallas. It's called the City Performance Hall, and its history was that there are a lot of multicultural communities in Dallas, both Latino and Asian, and the businesses that are in Texas brought a lot of people because the computer business and Texas Instruments and some of the early companies in technology design were in Texas. So these people were part of that scene, and they had a lovely Central Opera House and a art museum, the Nasher Art Museum, and the Symphony Center there that was already 20 years old. But the interesting thing was that the local cultural groups, particularly the Latino and the Asian, all had their own little cultural communities because that was very important to them. They had dance, they had music, they had instrumental, all these things, but they had no place to perform that was really adequate. They couldn't afford to rent the Opera Center or the Symphony Center. And the city recognized that donors who had performed, or the ones who sponsored the formal arts community, weren't picking up on the need to provide a performance hall for the local cultural communities. So this was the purpose of it, and the city of Dallas became the client. And they put it on a city bond along with sewer improvements and everything else, which was ironic that, anyway, it was a small part of the improvements for sewers and roads, and it was approved. So they could move forward with building a hall for the people of Dallas. And that became the City Performance Hall. When we started on it, again, we had to do a lot of interviewing because they had representatives formally of organizations numbering about 70 that were multicultural groups that maintained their cultures, and they would appear in the field house of a park district or a church basement, all this sort of thing. And the city wanted us to talk with all these people. So for 1 year, we scheduled monthly a trip to Dallas, and we would maybe interview 10 or so groups at a time, scheduled for an hour or so. We developed a questionnaire. We developed statistical data that could be put in a computer easily and collate all this information. And what did it tell us? Well, number one, the city really wanted to satisfy these people because it was getting to be a hot question, and all the wealthy people had their place, but we don't. So we also hired a developer or a estimator who specialized in estimating performing arts projects, and he sat in on all of our meetings with the groups, so he understood what they wanted as well. And then we would put a final program together. Well, the program exceeded what the city's budget was for the first time it was identified. And we then started looking at phasing the building. And we designed it in a way that you could build the centerpiece first and it would function adequately. But also either side of the building. We put the centerpiece in the center of the property, and the two phases that they could build on subsequent city bonds would all work together so that it didn't look at any point like the second phase was stuck on to the building. They all worked together, and we built little models of how they did that. And so we moved ahead in '06 with construction of phase one. And phase one is what you see in the pictures that we had. And we put everything in the most professional way and put the money into equipment. And we did not put velvet seats on chairs and marble walls. Everything is concrete. And we worked with a consultant in acoustics that specialized in theater and a theater planner who devoted their time to theater planning. And as a team, we were able to give them something that was not that expensive as performing arts halls are typically, and they could afford it. And their first amount of money that came from a city bond built the centerpiece of the project, which is what you see in the photos that are at the end of the presentation. And there's a view from the stage. It had a balcony. It had catwalks above the ceiling so they could change lighting. We had everything that a professional theater has, and then some. And it turned out that it was so good acoustically that the symphony hall across the street for smaller quartet concerts rents from us at the City Performance Hall because it's better than their own acoustically. So we felt really good about that because we said we're not going to put all the money into the expensive finishes, but have design that really functioned. And that's what it did. And I love that project for that concept because it really worked. And I was so proud of how it came out in that regard. In 2010, we were starting to work on the Burj Tower in Dubai. So I was back on foreign work again. And I worked again on programming, which we spent a good deal of time on, and it's very important. It's not just looking at the exterior of the building, but analyzing all the things that take place in it and really satisfying all these things. And so again, I did visit once when they got to the point where they were starting to finish off the space. The structure is very unique, and our structural team did a fabulous job of how to put a tall building on a sand basis. It has a huge pad that is 10 feet deep, concrete at the bottom of all the piles, and is on sand at, it's a floating concept really for the building, and it spreads way out to give it stability within a sand base. So that took about 10 years to finish, from the beginning of it to when it was dedicated in 2010. And then we had some beautiful artwork that were commissioned for the lobbies, and those were an international search for people who could propose a concept for lobbies that were very tall. And the picture on the left-hand side is a view of the sculpture that is over the lobby of the residential side of the building, and it was Jome Plenza, who is internationally known Catalonian artist. He did those two towers in Millennium Park that are faces with the photographs rotating and the water shedding down the squares of glass on those two towers at Monroe and Michigan. He was the one who won the commission for the residential of the Burj Dubai, and they are symbols that are on rods, all gold symbols that are 180 some symbols, and they represented the number of countries in the world at that time. And they sit over 2 ponds of water, and they've got drip, drip water above the ceiling that recirculates, and it makes a little musical sound hitting the symbols as the water drips down into the pond and recirculates. And it's called World Voices, which is a lovely conceptual title for it. And that is the end of my presentation. I like to end with that one because it's very meaningful. And I did get to go over in the latter part of the project, although we had a full-time staff on site during that time. But I was grateful to be able to see it. And so that is a lasting memory. So I will close with that.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I know I really enjoyed hearing more about your career and the projects that you've worked on throughout your time at SLM and before then. We do have a little bit of time now for some Q&A. So I have some questions prepared for you, Nancy, and then we're gonna open it up to everybody else too. So if you guys have questions for Nancy, feel free to type those into the general chat now, and we'll try to answer a few before we close out the formal portion of the brunch and head back into networking. So I guess to start with, as one of the founders of CWA, what was it like to be at the beginning of this organization? And what was it that led you to join the other women in starting this?
Well, I don't think that our first meeting defined what the organization was really going to be. It was a point of having the women in profession gather and find out about them and what experiences they had and how we could be effective as an organization in furthering careers or what ever came out of our discussion. So the first day that we met was probably one of the record cold winter days of a Saturday. I remember that. And we all went to Gertrude's office, which was on Michigan Avenue, not far from Monroe Street, along there. And as Carol had said, she had a small office because she had originally worked on O'Hare and had worked with others, and she was starting out on her own at that time. So she was also developing contacts and project proposals and things. And so there were 8 of us who showed up. At the time, I was still in interiors, but I realized that there were a couple people at Murphy at the time. One, Pao-Chi Chang Swenson, who was from IIT, and she was Chinese, and she had come to the United States to study with Nice at IIT, and she worked at Murphy. And then there was another girl who worked with us who was from Champaign, and she was an architect, but she was put into the interior department, me. And then there was the third girl who was from Scandinavia, and she was working in the architectural department. So there were 3 women that I could count on how many were at Murphy at that time. But it was important because I saw that there were women doing it and not just limited to interiors, which was always kind of the thought that that would be good for the women. So those 2 people, they were unable to come to the meeting, but I went, and then the 8 of us who were there, Natalie had retired from SOM at that time, I don't believe, or no, I beg your pardon. She was still there, but she had worked on the building, the Equitable building on Michigan Avenue. And that was one of her projects, most recent at that time. And then she subsequently moved to Texas, where she joined the faculty at the University of Texas in architecture and worked for a firm in Texas for a while at Houston. And she stayed there until she retired in Texas. And so and Gertrude was just getting going with her own practice. So we kind of spent the time getting to know each other, who we were, because we would have heard their names, but we had never met them. And the first thing that we really did that showed our presence was, I think Carol referred to it too, we developed a exhibit of women's work, and it was made up of the work of women in Chicago that wanted to put together their work. And we had, trying to think where it was held. There was a place over on Hubbard Street that was kind of an art gallery, but it was a space that was vacant to set up panels with boards that had each of the people that wanted to contribute to what they were doing to be in the exhibit. And that was extremely successful. And it coincided with the Chicago 7, which were a group of Chicago men that were putting their work out, that was kind of a reply to the New York 5 that had happened just before it. And so this was Chicago's answer to the New York 5 for the men. So we said, we'll have one for the women. And that turned out to be so popular that other cities not only wanted to ultimately start women's organizations, but they wanted to have our exhibit, the exact exhibit from Chicago, as a traveling exhibit. So we sent it around. It went to, I think, there was a Houston exhibit. There was one on the West Coast, and I think we went to New York. Do you remember, Carol, where all we sent our exhibit? If you're there.
I'm not sure she'd be able to.
Anyway, it turned out, I mean, we didn't expect this, so we had to get some donations to be able to put it on the road.
Mm-hmm.
But the panels and everything that we had developed to display the pictures or drawings and a little bio and all that were usable. So we were shipping it around. And at that time, Laura had subsequently moved to Houston, Laura Fisher. And so she was down there, I believe, when the exhibit took place or came through. And so it really kind of put us on the map. And it also brought out more interest in how can we make this into more than just an exhibit exercise and then finish. And so it became the ground for starting the organization with the success of our exhibits.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's great that it was able to take off and
Yeah,
be recognized countrywide.
I know, it was
Yeah.
amazing, and we got press on it and everything at
Fantastic.
that time in the other places that we sent it, and people were requesting it. We didn't pick a place and say, we're sending you this, they were all
Yeah.
by invite.
That's great. We have another question here from the audience. Are there specific ways to engage with the communities for their input when working on projects abroad, particularly in areas culturally different than the US?
Definitely. I think all the more important where they are culturally different. And the whole exercise of having programming was something that was foundational to my work, that we always spent a good amount of time with the client, finding out what they wanted to achieve, how they worked, what was their culture in their firm, what is the culture of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And that was foundational to everything I worked on. That we did not ignore a programming phase as part of the project, and we built it into the fee of our work, that programming was one of the phases that we calculated fee for. And I believe that's what leads to a successful project.
Yeah.
It's not just envisioning a building. It is getting very close to the client and build relationships with the clients. That I still have relationships of friends with these clients that I spent, 3-4 years working on something for them.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're very important to me.
Yeah, you gotta really get to know people.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in some cases, I was fortunate. I had studied French, and I also, the first trip I ever made to Europe was to go to Germany at the invite of a colleague who worked at SOM, Brigitte Peterhans. I don't know if you all have heard of her, but she had lived through World War II, and she was a teenager, and she had heard about East Van Grove's school in Chicago, and she got a Fulbright to come to IIT, and then she stayed here, and she came to Skidmore, and she became a lifelong dear friend of mine. And she unfortunately passed away last year. And I forget that, quite frankly, that she's not here, because something will come up and I'll say, oh, I would like to tell Brigitte about this. And then I have to stop. No, she's not here any longer. But I mean, for 40 years, she was a close friend. And she was, she came to IIT, and she married one of the faculty persons that came from Germany with Nice when the small group that was at the Bauhaus, third Bauhaus in Berlin, when the Germans closed them down. And they all came to the US, the leading people, Walter Gropius, Albers, Nice, and the whole important group from the Bauhaus. And Walter Peterhans taught the theory design, and he was a teacher at IIT and was one of her teachers, and she ultimately married him. So she had a history that included intimate understanding of the Bauhaus from him, as well as her own experiences. And she invited me to make my first trip to Germany while we were working together early on. And I didn't know a word of German at the time, but she drove me all over southern Germany and she would talk to me. And I got so frustrated that I couldn't speak for myself. I wanted to talk to these people, not just listen and nod back and forth, yes, of what they were saying. So I came back and I went to Goethe Institute to learn German because I determined I wasn't going back till I could speak for myself. And so I was able to communicate on subsequent trips in German, and I just loved it. It gave me such a thrill to be speaking with people on my own. And similarly, one of the projects in London, last project I worked on was a project in Paris, on the circular road around Paris, the periphery, and it was headquarters for CWA. And so I went over Paris about every 2 weeks in my last year in London to meet with the local architect and the client that was developing the project. And it was all in French, and I could manage. I loved it. I love language anyway, because it says something about the culture. And so if you have any other skills that, you never know when they're going to come in handy. Yeah. So I can assure you that everything that you ever learned as you were studying will become useful. It's just not the architectural training, but it's people and culture and your knowledge of history of these countries. If you're going to visit or work in them, you should bone up on it. It's very important to the relationship with the client.
Yeah, thank you for those stories. I think they really underscore the importance of the connections that we make as architects and how it can change your career.
Yeah.
We have another question here. What do you think the future of architectural practice is in the U.S.? Think of the future of architectural practices in the U.S.
Right.
What will be the biggest challenge in the years ahead?
I think initially we're all going to have to figure out how we're going to practice post-pandemic, because it's introduced to people alternative ways. But my personal opinion is that I don't think it can go totally that way. A personal connection that's real is also important to building relationships. So I'm not sure how it will work out. It will be different for people, and I think there will be choices that different firms and different people make that works for them. But I certainly wouldn't want to be only working electronically with people. I just feel that there has to be that personal contact element to it, and use the computer for long distance meetings. When I worked on Dubai, we had weekly meetings. I was in charge of 20 other consultants that were stationed all over the world. And we had meetings and nobody could come together. And the cost of airfare from Chicago to Dubai was horrendous in those days, when they just opened flights going from the US, and they had some flights early on from Texas because they were the oil connection. Mm-hmm. And to open in Chicago, when I went, we flew to London by British Air and then transferred to a flight British Air to Dubai. So you were about 24 hours travel to get there. And the tickets were very expensive. So you didn't send everybody regularly to the site, but we had resident people that spent the whole time living there. at the site. So I think we're at a point where we're going to reevaluate as we all get our shots and get ready to go again, regarding how, and the question of, design, what is appropriate. I think we've come around since the postmodern back to more, not exactly the Mies style, but, it's not just phony decoration on the exterior of the building. Like back in that time, Philip Johnson did a concrete building in New York that had a Chippendale curlicue on the top of the building, and it took all these antique motifs and things. And he had gone through school, his own little house near New Haven is, beautiful. And all of a sudden he's doing the sort of trendy thing, but he too went back to more rational evaluation of what is appropriate for the building. And the buildings that Mies did were innovative, not only in appearance, but also in technology. They brought a lot of technologies that didn't even exist in order to build what they were building at that time. And I live in a Mies building, and my neighbor was a fellow who went to school at IIT and worked at Mies's office early on. And he would tell me the stories behind what was a simple solution to something, but technology did not exist to build it. And so they had to create the technologies to even put in all glass window facades, because there was no caulking that would be watertight to hold them in. And he said that thiacol was developed just to be able to secure the glass in the windows, or they would all be leakers. And, just small little things. And the fan coil unit was developed because they didn't want the old-fashioned radiators sitting in front of the windows. So the low boy came out, and those were all custom made. They didn't exist, but they established materials and ways of building things as they went.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Fantastic to hear.
Yeah. And so, there's all of that to be built upon, because, with the developments of NASA and all of that. And I was in school at Northwestern when Alan Shepard took the first space shot from Canaveral out, and we all went down in the basement of the sorority house at 6 a.m. so we could see him take off. It was the first man that went out to the edge of space, so to speak, as we were defining it. And I never forgot that, because he was the one man in the rocket, and they kept showing 50 people sitting at what were then some kind of control equipment that they could keep track of him. But it took 50 people to let that one man go there. And that expressed for me what it means for teamwork.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think often in architecture, you have a figurehead, and it's always good to remember the team behind the projects that make them successful.
Yeah, he was, trained to be able to fly. He came from the Navy as a pilot, so he was well equipped to do this, and had undergone training and psychological training that they could deal with it and all of that. And he was the perfect person to be able to courageously hop into this thing and do it for the first time ever and come back.
Yeah.
And so he was the hero in that respect. But he needed all those people to make it happen. And that's how I really developed appreciation for teamwork at that time. that I always, it flashes through my head. And I was so frightened at the same time. I couldn't sit down. We were in our lounge in the basement of our sorority house in our pajamas. And I was standing watching the TV. I could not sit down. I was so frightened with the thought of how he was going to make it.
I can only imagine.
And I still think of that.
I think we are over time right now. So I want to invite all of you. There's some really great questions in here. So I wanted to invite all of you guys to join us in the networking portion of the event that will follow this. So you can find Nancy and continue asking her your questions. Before we go back to the networking portion, I want to offer my sincerest congratulations to you, Nancy, on the receipt of the CWA Lifetime Achievement Award. It has been a real honor to get to know you over the past couple months and to learn more about your career. It's really a well-deserved award. So congratulations.
Thank you. It was my honor to be able to talk with you all, and I hope that when we're all able to get together personally again, some of your future meetings, keep in touch. I'd love to come and meet you all in person.
Yes, we'll have to plan something in person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also would like to once again thank all of our sponsors for their support in making this event possible today. I also want to thank the CWA and CWAF board members who put in a lot of work and effort into making this event come together today. So thank you all for that. And finally, I want to thank everybody who attended today, and thank you for celebrating with us. And I look forward to talking to you in the networking portion. So thank you, guys.